Welcome to the Danny Clinkscale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Insightful and witty commentary, probing interviews, and detours from the beaten path.
Welcome to Kansas City Profiles presented by Easton Roofing. A couple of weeks back, I had the great pleasure of going to the Downtown Council annual luncheon as they gave honors to several prominent Kansas Cityans and also looked forward in a way to the downtown of Kansas City in 2030, the Downtown Kansas City 2030 strategic plan. There were many speakers, but the keynote speaker brought things around to a subject that we visited for the last time, kind of, in 2005 when there was a vote on a downtown ballpark. The keynote speaker was Paul Goldberger, a contributing editor at Vanity Fair. He began his career at the New York Times, where he was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Distinguished Criticism for his writing on architecture. But most recently, he has written a book entitled Ballpark, Baseball in the American City, and his premise is a good one. Ballparks do parallel, to a remarkable degree, trends in American urbanism. They start as an escape from the city, then the city builds up around them. Post-World War II, they escape to the suburbs, then decades later, they return to the city. He's an expert on that. It's a great historical treatise, but it also is a fascinating read for any baseball fan and should be part of your baseball library if you're really serious about the history of the game. He gave a great presentation that day, and then I had the pleasure of speaking with him afterwards and talking about his book, about baseball, about ballparks, about architecture, and a whole range of things. A charming conversation with Paul Goldberger, a Pulitzer Prize winner, and now a writer of a great baseball book as well. This wonderful conversation comes your way next on Kansas City Profiles, presented by Easton Roofing. We're here with Joe Spiker, the president of Easton Roofing. And Joe, you worked for other companies in the construction industry. What inspired you to start your own company in Easton Roofing?
Well, you know, Danny, when you are working for somebody else, you oftentimes don't get to see the project through from beginning to end, and you don't get the final control over the customer experience. And I wanted to build a place where people can come and get work done on their house and not have to worry about being treated the wrong way and get a good customer service experience start to finish.
The company slogan is "Where Integrity Matters." Why is that so particularly important to you?
Well, for us, what that means is treating each other with respect at work, treating our clients with respect, and making the right choice, especially when no one's looking. So when you're presented all the time as a contractor with choices that have to be made, are you going to make more money on this if you cut a corner? And we just wanted to make a place and a slogan that said to our people and to whoever is our customer, we're not going to do that. We're going to make the right choice regardless of profit.
Easton Roofing, where integrity matters. Are you thinking of starting a new business? Does your current business feel stuck? Or are you just trying to grow what you already have? Running a business is a lot of work, and it takes the right team to make it all happen. If you're looking to grow your business, call my friends Ben and Greg over at Fuego Consulting. They put together a company that can help you reach your business goals. Whether you're looking to get online, build a social media strategy, or rebrand your business, they can help. Call Fuego at 816-663-9695 or visit them online at fuegoconsulting.com. Fuego Consulting. Let's grow your business together.
If you'd like to join these and other great sponsors and market your business to a growing and engaged audience, contact us at danny@dannyclinkscale.com. Look forward to hearing from you.
Paul, you're such an esteemed writer of about architecture and critic, a critic through the years, winner of a Pulitzer Prize, as we noted in the open. At this point in your career, what motivated you? What was the inspiration to write about baseball architecture?
Well, you know, I've always loved baseball, and I've always been a big fan. And over the years, when there had been a new ballpark of interest, I had usually gone to write about it. And so I finally decided, you know, there's a bigger story there that has not been told. When I was at the New Yorker 10 years ago, and the new Citi Field in Yankee Stadium opened in the same year, in 2009, the, I think, only time in history two Major League ballparks have opened in the same year in the same city. I realized writing that column about them how deep and complex the relationship of ballparks to urban history was. And because I was looking at old sites of Yankee Stadium and a lot of the sites the Yankees had looked at before they built their original Yankee Stadium in 1923 and so forth. And I realized there was a book in this somehow, and I spoke to my publisher, and I had just right around then agreed to write a biography of Frank Gehry, the architect Frank Gehry, for them, and they said, well, we love this idea, but just don't do it till you finish the other one.
Right.
So I did exactly that. I finished the other book, and then I started on this and had a great time with it.
When you start to write about baseball history, there's sort of an early golden age of building baseball parks in the teens and 20s. Many of them became the most iconic ballparks in the country.
Yes.
Just talk about, from an architectural standpoint, a little bit about those ballparks, like what eventually became Tiger Stadium and Fenway Park and Wrigley Field.
Sure. Tiger Stadium and Fenway Park, incidentally, in the category of trivial information, opened on the same day, April 20th, 1912. They both opened. That was sort of the golden age. It was not really the beginning. In fact, one of the things that surprised me as I worked on the book was how rich and complex the history of pre-Fenway ballparks was. That there was an enormous amount in the 19th century, virtually all of them built of wood. Most of them burned.
Right.
And there are records and photographs, but not huge numbers of them. And so I thought there'd be kind of one short introductory chapter to this book, and then we'd get right up to stuff like Fenway Park. In fact, there were 3 long chapters before we get to Fenway Park,
Right.
because there was so much. But that golden age that you asked about, yes, they were great, because the ballparks were becoming monumental civic buildings, but they still had a wonderful casualness and informality to them, and an intimacy. The ballparks of that age, and of course we've lost most of them now, combined intimacy and monumentality better than almost any other architecture I've ever seen. And for that alone, they're kind of magnificent, really. But we've lost ones that probably were better in many ways than the ones we're lucky enough to still have. I think Ebbets Field, Tiger Stadium, which we certainly shouldn't have lost so recently, Forbes Field in Pittsburgh. There were many, and they were magnificent, a lot of them, yeah.
And basically it's not the next thing, there's so many years, but the next significant change in architecture would be what you call the concrete donuts.
Yes.
And it sort of, as you talked about in your presentation, and also is in the book, it kind of reflects what American cities were like. The fact that American cities were places where everybody lived and, thrived, or at least tried to thrive. And then eventually people who did thrive would move to the suburbs, and eventually maybe didn't even want to be in the city. And cities had faced some kind of collapse, and there's white flight and everything else. So that's the next time we have sort of a real significant culture change as far as stadiums are concerned.
Yes. Part of the thesis of the book is that baseball really mirrors the whole culture. And where we built ballparks and how we built ballparks tells us how we thought of our cities. And we went from thinking of them as natural places that were just part of a neighborhood urban fabric to these big concrete donuts that were suburban and out on the freeway and surrounded by acres of parking. And then we began to try in various ways to reintegrate them again. So in each case, it absolutely mirrors what the culture was thinking and feeling about its cities. And we still see that.
Was there any of the concrete donuts that was at least a titch better than any of the others?
Yeah, well, Kaufman in Kansas City,
but it's not really right. It's not really
better.
a baseball football park. So
right.
It's the best version of.
But and Dodger Stadium in L.A., which we still have, which is actually a quite wonderful place. Not much fun to go to or to get out of.
Right.
But once you're in it, it's wonderful. And so that.
Is there even a half-decent multi-purpose?
half decent, maybe. But I'm not sure I'd go too much farther than that. I mean, look, I like Shea Stadium in New York better than some because it was never fully around. It was never fully enclosed. The worst were the ones that were enclosed on all sides.
Right.
Because there's something about, for me at least, there's something about space being open over the outfield and it not feeling completely enclosed. That's right for baseball because baseball is about kind of infinite space.
Right.
And so Shea is a kind of, it's not really a donut. It was a circle, but a circle with the outfield end never enclosed.
Right.
So that made it better. And there were certain others like that as well.
But Shea Stadium wasn't even really designed to be used originally for football, was it?
Yes, it was designed as a multi-purpose stadium.
Was it really?
Yeah.
That surprises
me. And it was used as for football.
Yeah, I knew that.
A certain amount. But you're right. Certainly, there was an awful lot of improvised use of them for football. Rarely did it work very well.
I remember Wrigley Field, the brick
Bears,
wall actually encroached on the end zone slightly.
Yep.
Barely fit in there. Same with Fenway Park, where I attended games.
And in Kansas City, when Municipal Stadium and Muleback were used before the construction of Arrowhead, they had to reconfigure the seating so significantly to make it work that there was a period when the Chiefs could not play home games until into October. The first month of the season, they had to play away because they needed time for the baseball season to end, and then for them to do the reconfiguration of seating.
And that ended up, at least on television, I lived in the Boston area then, it looked like they did a reasonably good job with Municipal Stadium to turn it into what almost looked like a football stadium.
Well, I think they did in part because it was never. Remember, it's smaller than a lot of the others,
right?
And there weren't really quite enough seats anyway. Certainly not for football, and they had to add some to make it work for football. And because it was very open and the baseball seating was really only around the baselines, they had a lot of space available in the outfield to put football seats. But obviously those football seats couldn't go in until you didn't need the outfield anymore, until the baseball season was over.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then you talked about the Arrowhead complex. And how much of a missed opportunity do you think the rolling roof was, if money had been no object?
I think it probably would have been a kind of cool thing, a little bit ahead of its time. And a rolling roof ultimately is what came to be in at Safeco in Seattle,
right?
Now called T-Mobile Stadium,
right?
But the one here was not ready for prime time yet, as it turned out, and so I think it would have been okay because during good weather, which is more prevalent in the baseball season than the football season, it would have essentially disappeared. And in fact, it would have been behind, unlike Seattle, where it goes in a different direction, would have been entirely behind home plate.
Right.
And sitting in the ballpark, you never would have even seen it if it was open. And, I mean, look, I'm not a fan of any roofed ballpark for baseball, really. But I do concede that a retractable roof can make sense, certainly in some climates, particularly the South.
Right.
And as long as it's not a fixed dome, which is totally and completely unforgivable in baseball.
Let's talk about how we got out of the cookie cutter type of stadiums. Our guest is Paul Goldberger, and his book, of course, is Ballpark, and that is the history of the American ballpark from an architecture standpoint. Why don't I get the title right? Ballpark, Baseball in the American City. That'd be good. Published by Alfred Knopf. And how did we escape the prison of the concrete mausoleum?
Well, nicely phrased question, I would say.
I had to recover after I didn't get the title right.
We escaped gradually, and we're still not 100% out of it, although we're mostly out of it. I attribute a huge amount of it to the folks in Baltimore,
right,
who were building. Now, Baltimore had made a decision to build a baseball-only stadium, but the ownership of the Baltimore Orioles was quite determined not to build a big concrete bunker, concrete donut, and they rejected the first designs of the architect and just kept sending them back to the drawing board. As simple as that. And they said, we want something that feels more like an old-fashioned baseball park. And eventually they got it. But it was three people. The then owner of the team, an investor named Eli Jacobs, who happened to have had a great interest in architecture. Larry Lucchino, who was the CEO of the team then, and he had grown up in Pittsburgh and loved Forbes Field and had dreamed of recreating something sort of like that. And then a woman they hired as the team's own in-house sort of architectural coordinator,
right,
to be the kind of client, in effect, and deal with the architects, named Janet Marie Smith, who has since then become famous for Camden Yards and for its success, and the whole rest of her career has been as a ballpark consultant going around the country, and she's worked with multiple teams. She helped with the renovations of Fenway Park to preserve its qualities, doing the same thing now at Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles. And she's a remarkable and strong and impressive person.
Let's talk about the Fenway Park one for a little bit. I'm from Boston, so I went to Fenway Park when in its original state back in the days. I don't think they really could have done any better. I mean, you really feel like you're still in Fenway Park. The additions all seem to work. It was pretty much a master stroke, wasn't it?
Yes, and that's mostly Janet Marie Smith, who they've been, they've subtly upgraded a lot of the facilities. They've done things. Well, what people talk most about is the seats on the Green Monster,
right,
which are fun and fine, and they only add to the unique quality of it. They don't diminish it at all. And they've done a number of other things around there that change it, but in ways that, exactly as you say, do not in any way detract from the original quality of it. It still feels like Fenway, and it's still beautiful and wonderful.
More of Danny's Reasonably Irreverent podcast after this.
Cinematic Visions has been an affordable solution for professional media production in Kansas City since 2003, offering award-winning video production and creation, as well as a wide array of digital and social media management services. From planning, scripting, filming, editing, and post-production, to delivering your product to a watching world, Cinematic Visions will provide professional and affordable services for you and your business with the necessary return on investment to make it all worthwhile. Cinematic Visions' goal is to unlock the power of storytelling through video and a strong online presence for your company. Beyond the numbers, they want to inspire and evoke your clients to feel and act. Let my friends at Cinematic Visions embed your brand where it belongs, in your customers' minds. You can find them online at cinematicvisions.com or with a quick phone call at 816-600-6300.
For many people, a family law case will be one of the most difficult experiences in their life. The law firm of Kenneth McRae will help you through it. Personal and effective help from Ken in concert with you will develop a unique strategy for your unique case. As Ken always says, divorce can be civil law, not civil war. Licensed in Kansas? Visit McRaeLawOffice.com or call 913-972-4765.
Hey guys, it's Brian Haney, voice of the Jayhawks, and Matt Llewellyn from the 23rd Street Brewery. Matt, I've got a bunch of buddies coming over to watch the big game, and I need some ideas on what to cook.
Hey, let me handle it, Brian.
You're going to come over and cook for us?
For you, maybe. But you should just let 23rd Street Brewery cater it. We could bring a big pan of Bill Self mac and cheese, wings, veggies, naked nachos, and anything else you might want.
Great. Well, you want to stick around and watch the game?
No, I've got to get back to the brewery and watch it on the big screen.
The place to get great catering and watch all the games, the 23rd Street Brewery in Lawrence.
If you'd like to join these and other great sponsors and market your business to a growing and engaged audience, contact us at Danny@DannyKlinkscale.com. Look forward to hearing from you. It seems like most of the retro ballparks, that's kind of what they're all called, in their various incarnations, almost all of them have seemed to work at least to some degree, and many of them spectacularly. Pittsburgh, I mean, one after the other. Is there any one of those that you feel has missed the mark a little bit?
They're all better than the previous generation, no doubt about that. I mean, the floor is higher than the ceiling for the last generation. You can question some of the ones with roofs. Again, they're retractable roofs. No one will do thankfully, no one will do a fixed roof for baseball anymore. I think that Chase in Phoenix is a bit of an airplane hangar.
Yeah.
I think that while Minute Maid in downtown Houston is far superior to the Astrodome, which it replaced as a place to see a baseball game, I don't think it's quite as wonderful as PNC in Pittsburgh or some of the others. But I don't think there's any that I would say totally fails of the recent generation, of the post-Camden Yards generation,
right.
Children of Camden Yards, you could call them, I guess. I mean, the only major failure of that period is the one that was opened a year before Camden Yards, which is now called Guaranteed Rate Field, the new Comiskey Park in Chicago, which is really the last of the concrete donuts.
Right.
And it was a dinosaur because we were getting away from that when it opened. Camden Yards was already under construction, and the world changed completely. So it was really particularly out of date, given that it didn't open until 1991.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. And, so let's get back to what you were speaking about today, which is Kansas City. And I did find it interesting. In 2005, there was the initiative to move the ballpark downtown, and I was very much in favor of it. The radio station I worked for, we were very much in favor of it, and I was interested in your take on it. That you thought, while you said you would have supported it,
I'm sure if I had been in Kansas City at the time, as a fan of downtown baseball, I would have said, "Great, go for it, make it happen."
But maybe just a titch too early.
But I think with hindsight, we can see now that, in fact, it probably was a little too early. It probably would have been okay,
right?
But Kansas City was not quite as ready for it as it is now.
Well, I think what it shows is exactly what your template for your book is, the fact that ballparks reflect cities, cities reflect ballparks.
Right.
Kansas City was still, I used to describe it at that point in time. If somebody asked me from outside Kansas City who'd never been there, what would I say? I would always reply, well, Kansas City is really a giant suburb. It's really not a city. And that, thankfully, has changed and is changing. But if you have that as the earmark of your city, then then many people aren't going to be ready for that.
A lot of cities in the last decade have been sort of redensifying and returning to the center core and strengthening their cores, and Kansas City is absolutely one of them. And so I think had this happened then, it probably would have worked, but more would have been expected of it than it could have delivered. Now I think it's a time to really just integrate it in with all of the other great things that are happening in downtown Kansas City. And this can be something that will reinforce those other things and in turn be supported by them. More people live here now, which is great. Nothing is better than being able to walk to a ballpark.
Right.
Similarly, if you look at San Francisco, which went from having one of the worst ballparks in the major leagues with Candlestick Park to now I think one of the best in the south of Market area. The ballpark alone did not make south of Market. There were lots of forces developing that whole part of the city, but it became a great reinforcing tool and strengthened the other development. The other development in turn strengthened it. You can walk to the ballpark from many neighborhoods. And so
when
forth.
you're going to the ballpark, it's downhill.
Yeah.
For everybody, just about.
You've got to come home, though. But
yes,
still.
you do have to eventually go home. But going to, it's it's downhill.
Mm-hmm.
Kansas City has a bit of a unique geographical structure, and so there have been a few different things or areas that have been talked about. How important do you think it is to have a ballpark be really, really in the downtown? Now, PNC, which is a beautiful one, is across the bridges from the city, because one of the projected areas for Kansas City is down in the River Market area, which would provide a cityscape over the fence, but really wouldn't be in the downtown area proper. It'd be across the highway. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think it absolutely has to be right in the core of downtown. I mean, in fact, I don't know that a ballpark next to a skyscraper with a bank headquarters is necessarily the ideal thing anyway. Right. I think it just needs to be walkable, but you can define walkable in a lot of ways.
Right.
And with the success of the streetcar in Kansas City, that's sort of encouraging too. It means you can define walkable in maybe a little broader way.
Sure.
It needs things to kind of hook into and connect to. And it can often do very well in a neighborhood that is in the process of developing and be part of it. We see that in Washington with the new stadium for the Washington Nationals now, which is...
which hasn't been that well received as a ballpark.
No,
itself.
It's not. And it's a sort of mixed bag. It's probably one of the weaker of the new generation. It's not terrible by any means, but it's just okay. It's not more than okay. But I kind of like the way it fits into that developing neighborhood around the Navy Yard. And it's actually been very successful in helping to stimulate development. So in that sense, it's good.
I wanted to ask you real quickly before we return to the major leagues and maybe look ahead a little bit. Is there a real opportunity for smaller cities who have double and triple A baseball to embrace this in kind of a different way, in more of a developmental way? I'm going to do something in Wichita here soon, and maybe you have a little more space. Maybe you have a little more. It's a little less costly to build the stadium itself. So the projects, is that an opportunity if Major League Baseball doesn't try to submarine the minor leagues like that?
Yes, it is an opportunity. And in fact, although I don't deal in the book very much with minor league ballparks, I do a little bit. And one of the few that I do talk about is the one that was built in Buffalo in the very late 80s, I think, because that was actually the model for Camden Yards than anything. It was the first really well-integrated, traditional downtown ballpark built in the age of the concrete donut.
Right.
And so it was actually quite important. And some of those ideas could be tried out in a more modest way there, and were done very successfully. And there have been some others since then, too. Yes, absolutely. In fact, it's easier to do a minor league ballpark because it's easier to integrate something with 10,000 seats into urban fabric than something with 40,000 seats.
Right, absolutely. In coming to Kansas City and doing some research about it and everything, do you feel like the city itself, and here we are at a downtown council, so there's a lot of enthusiasm for things downtown. Do you think the appetite is right, the timing is right? Because during your presentation, which was wonderful, you were fairly evangelical about it.
Yeah, I think this is the time. I mean, first, now, unlike 15 years ago, Kansas City can look to cities all over the country. I mean, in my talk, I listed a lot of them. And
did you skip St. Louis on purpose?
St. Louis is complicated, although I could have. But St. Louis actually has had downtown baseball for a long time.
Right, or a long, long time.
Because, I mean, this is, as we know, the current Busch Stadium is not the...
Right. So it wasn't really, I understand your point. It wasn't really a change for St. Louis.
Right. Exactly. And so...
there's so many success stories. It's like,
there are many success stories.
Why are the ones?
Right. And other cities like Oakland that are now preparing to do this and move baseball downtown as well. It feels and somehow like just this is the time for the city now. It does not have to be a leader, or it does not have to even take a huge risk. And we now have a lot of other financing tools, so it's not a simple matter of just raiding the public purse, which I don't approve of either. I don't think tax dollars should be the form of subsidy for a private corporation, but because baseball does also serve a particular public function, I think it's appropriate to find mechanisms that help support the construction of ballparks in central urban areas without necessarily raiding the public coffers either. And we see a lot of mechanisms with tax increment financing, with adjacent developmental rights, with other things, with sometimes land being provided while the ownership actually pays the brick and mortar costs of construction. All of those things are certainly very possible, and we've seen them work in many places. To say downtown baseball or urban baseball is important is not to say that it has to be in the absolute core center of the very heart of downtown. Look at how successful Denver is, where its ballpark was built in the Lodo neighborhood, the old neighborhood at the edge of downtown.
Right.
It turned out, and it works beautifully integrated into a lot of those older buildings there, and it's been a great success there. The San Diego, similarly.
Right.
Wonderful downtown ballpark. Again, not right in the heart of the central business district, but in what's called the gas lamp area close by. And a lot of development has now been strengthened around it, in part as a result of that, in large part as a result of it, in fact. Because, even in the great heyday of ballparks, they were not in the very center of cities. Even then, land was too expensive. You need a lot of land for it. And they were more in sort of cheaper land kind of on the edge.
Yeah, Fenway Park isn't in downtown Boston.
No. It's not. Boston's not that big a city, and therefore it's not that
it's small.
far.
Right.
We think of it as convenient to downtown Boston, which it is, but also because Boston, in the years since 1912, when it opened, has grown so much around it and beyond it, it now has a more central location than it did. It was built, in part to attract people to a new developing area of Boston. Right. And the owners of the team, when Fenway Park was built, had a lot of real estate interests and wanted to promote the Fenway area. And that's why they called it Fenway Park. In those days, it was actually often very common for ballparks to be named after the team owners because they had built it.
Right.
I mean, Forbes Field, Shibe Park is a better example, actually, in Philadelphia, a great early ballpark from 1909, built by an owner. Of course, Ebbets Field.
Right.
And so forth.
Right.
Yeah.
We obviously have gone through this generation now of ballparks we like, and the return to downtown. Atlanta's the first place where they sort of decided, and Atlanta's a complex place, and traffic's horrendous and whatever.
Right.
But sooner or later, Camden Yards is 35 years old now, or is that right?
Not quite.
25 years.
25.
28.
28.
Yeah. We are going to. Do you see a next on the horizon? You're a student of architecture.
Yeah. What I see is this desire of ownerships of teams to control a little more of the land outside the gate. Ballpark Village in St. Louis is an example of that. It's not the best example. It's kind of wrong, but I don't object to it in principle. I wish it were better, but and we see that even at Wrigley Field, where the current ownership of the Cubs has been developing a lot of the neighborhood around it. It's made that neighborhood a little more generic, a little less funky, a little less distinctive.
Right.
And all that is unfortunate, but not tragic. What I think is sort of tragic, though, is Atlanta, where they made a very different decision to pick up and move wholesale way out to the suburbs and bought 60 acres and created this huge development, which is a sign that or an admission, let's call it, that you need some kind of urban environment. That baseball, you can't build a ballpark and just surround it with 20 acres of parking. But you need some kind of urban environment around it. But instead of connecting into the real urban environment of Atlanta, they created a fake one, and it's sort of a little Disneyland play city, so forth. There, and I don't terribly love places like that, and I think it's particularly unfortunate because it's a place that's not accessible from the city very easily unless you have a car,
right?
And that raises other questions as well.
In closing, how much fun did you have doing this?
Lots. Never had so much fun with a book ever, and people have great emotional connections to ballparks, and it's wonderful sort of talking to them about that, and it's wonderful just going around and seeing them. The part of the book, the early years stage of the book, of course, was more traditional research, stuff that's not there anymore, and so it's kind of library type research. But the second half, writing about stuff that's there now, going around to see it, was great.
This podcast was made possible by our great sponsors like Easton Roofing, the presenting sponsor of Kansas City Profiles at the Danny Kling Scale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Easton Roofing, where integrity matters. We hope you enjoyed the latest Danny Kling Scale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Come back soon for something fresh and new.